The cold came early that year, and it came without apology. Wichachpi Wing, Star Woman, woke before the light, as she had woken every morning of the 16 winters since she had first become a wife, and lay still a moment in the dark, listening to the breathing of the 3 children pressed against her under the worn buffalo robe. She could tell them apart by their breath alone. Oia, 11 winters old, slept the way he did everything now, tight and guarded, his breath short and shallow, as though even in sleep he was holding something back for later. Zitkala, 6, slept open-mouthed and loud, one small hand fisted in the fur at her mother's shoulder. And Hedchaka Chikala, Little Elk, her sister's son, 2 winters and no mother left to him, made the thin whistling sound in his chest that had started with the first hard frost and had not stopped since. That sound was the reason she was awake. She listened to it the way a person listens to a river in flood, measuring, judging, trying to read from the noise how much time was left before the bank gave way. The whistle came at the end of each small breath, high and dry, like wind through a split reed. She had heard that sound before. She had heard it in her own brother's chest the winter the soldiers burned the lodges on the powder, and she had heard it stop. Outside, the wind moved along the canvas of the lodge and found every place where the hide had worn thin and the stitching had gone brittle, and it came in and touched her face. She rose without waking them. The fire was down to a red eye in a bed of ash. She fed it 3 sticks of cottonwood. She counted them, because counting was all she had left of arithmetic, and because there were only 19 sticks remaining in the pile by the door. And she crouched over the small flame with her hands out and let the heat come into her knuckles until they could bend. Her hands were not old hands. She was 32 winters. But the joints had begun to ache in the cold the way her mother's had, and she thought, not for the first time, that a body keeps its own record of what has been asked of it, and does not lie the way a mouth can lie. The lodge was small. It had been a good lodge once, 17 hides, made by her mother-in-law and 4 other women in 3 days of work and singing on the Little Missouri, when there were still hides enough to be particular about. Now it was patched with government canvas at the smoke flaps and along the north side, and the painted figures her husband's father had put on it, the 4 horses, the pipe, the line of hills, had faded to the color of old blood and were peeling away in flakes each time the wind pulled at the cover. She stepped out into the morning. The agency lay along the flat above the river, and in the gray light it looked like something spilled rather than built. 200 lodges and more, and among them the low log houses the government had made for the families who agreed to live in log houses, and the square white buildings of the agent, and the storehouse, and the school, and the corral, and the flagpole with its rope slapping in the wind. Smoke rose from perhaps half the lodges. The other half had nothing to burn, or nothing to cook, and their fires were out. The river was frozen at the edges and black in the middle. Beyond it the bluffs went up brown and gray, and beyond those, north and west, the country ran away into a distance that had no end that she had ever found. And out there, under snow now, was every place she had ever been happy. She stood a moment with her blanket pulled to her chin. 4 winters ago, she thought, I did not know the word for hunger. I knew the feeling. Everyone knows the feeling. You feel it walking home from the hills. But I did not know it as a thing that lives in the lodge with you and takes a place by the fire and does not leave. Behind her in the lodge, Little Elk coughed, 3 small tearing coughs, and then the whistle again. She went to get the water. The ration issue was on the 8th day, and this was the 8th day. By mid-morning, the line at the storehouse ran back from the door and along the fence and out past the corral. 400 people standing in the cold with their tickets and their sacks and their sleds and their patience. Star Woman took her place near the middle with Ohia beside her, holding the sled rope. She had left the little ones with Unchitate, the grandmother in the next lodge, who was 80 winters if she was one, and who could no longer walk to the storehouse, but who could still hold a child and tell it the story of the meadowlark and make it stop crying. The line did not move for a long time. Cold worked upward from the ground through the soles of her moccasins, through the grass she had packed inside them, into her feet, into her ankles. She shifted from one foot to the other. Around her the talk went the way it always went. Someone said the beef issue would be short again. Someone said it would not, that the agent had received a letter. Someone said the agent's letters were not worth the paper they took to write, and someone laughed, and the laugh had no pleasure in it at all. Oya said nothing. He had stopped saying much in general. Since the boy's father had not come back from the fight in the north, since the word had come, second-hand and third-hand, from a man who had been at Slim Buttes and had seen Thunkun Sapa go down in the mud with the rain coming and the soldiers' horses everywhere, the boy had folded himself up like a knife and put himself away. "You should have worn the other leggings," she said to him. "These are fine. They are thin at the knee. They are fine." She let it go. There was a way in which a boy of 11 needed to be allowed to be cold, if being cold was the only choice he had left that was his own. When at last they came to the storehouse door, the clerk was a young white man named Fitch, who had been there since the summer, and who still had not learned any of their names, and who wrote in his book with the stiff, careful hand of a man who has been told that neatness is a form of honesty. "Ticket," he said. She gave it to him. He looked at it, and then he looked at his book, and then he did a thing with his mouth that she had learned to dread, a small tightening at the corner, the look of a man preparing to deliver bad news that he does not consider to be his fault. "4 in the lodge," he said. "4. Says 3 here. It is 4. My sister's son lives with me. His mother died in the summer. I told the agent this in the summer." Fitch looked at the page. "It says 3. Then the page is wrong." "The page isn't wrong, it's the roll. He'd be on his own family's roll. His family is dead." There was a silence in which the wind came around the corner of the storehouse and picked up loose snow and threw it against the wall. "You'll have to see the agent about a transfer," Fitch said, and he was already reaching for the flour. 3 rations. She stood very still. Here is the thing she had learned in 4 winters at the agency, and it was not a thing she could have explained to her mother, who had died before any of this. That the killing of a people does not always come with soldiers. Sometimes it comes with a young man in a clean collar and a good hand of writing who is not cruel, who would perhaps be kind if kindness were on the page in front of him, and who is doing exactly what he has been told, and who will go home in the evening to a warm room and eat, and sleep well, because the page said 3. "Give me the 3, she said. He gave her the 3. Flour, a little coffee, a little sugar, bacon that shone with salt, and a beef ticket for the killing pen. She put them on the sled and Ohia tied them, and they walked away, and she did not look at anyone. Halfway back to the lodge, the boy said quietly, "I could go to the hills." "No." "There are still rabbits. Chante's brother took 2 rabbits. Chante's brother is 15, and he was seen, and the police took his snare wire. You will not go past the line. They are counting us now. They count us every day, and a boy who is not counted is a boy who is running, and a boy who is running is a boy who can be shot, and no one will write anything in any book about it." She heard her own voice go hard, and she stopped and breathed and made it soft again, which cost her something. "Not yet. Do you hear me? Not yet." "Yes." He did not believe her. She could see it in the set of his jaw. He was going to go some morning, and she was going to wake and find the robe empty beside her, and then she would have that to carry too. That afternoon she went to the trader's store, because there was nothing else to be done. Malachi Rood kept the store at the edge of the agency, a long, low building of squared logs with a plank porch and a stovepipe and a smell coming out of the door that was coffee and kerosene and tobacco and hide and something sweet underneath it that she could never name. Rood had come into the country as a young man with a mule and a case of needles, and now he owned the store, and a freight interest, and a piece of the beef contract, and, men said quietly, in the way men say things in a place where saying things is dangerous. A share in whatever else moved on the river when the ice went out. He was not a big man. That was the thing people got wrong about him if they only heard the stories. He was of middling height, soft in the middle, with a clean gray beard and small hands that he kept very clean. And he had a way of listening to a person with his head tilted, as though what they were saying interested him greatly, which had made a great many people tell him a great deal more than they meant to. "Star woman," he said, "come in out of it." She came in. The stove was going. The heat of it made her eyes water, and she was ashamed of how good it felt. She put her mother's awl case on the counter. It was elk hide, quilled in red and white, and a blue that had come from a trader's beads 60 years before, in a pattern her mother's mother had made, and her mother had made, and she had made. 4 rows of it, the mark of their line, and there was not another one exactly like it in the world. "I need flour," she said, "and a tin of the camphor salve, and coal oil." Rude looked at the case for a long moment without touching it. "That's a fine piece of work," he said. "It is." "Your mother's?" "Yes." He turned it over with one finger. He did not pick it up. That was a thing he did. She had watched him do it with other people's belongings across 4 winters. A man who picks a thing up has admitted he wants it. "I'll tell you honest," he said, "there's no market. Time was an army officer's wife would give $2 for a pretty piece to take back east. Now there's 100 of them come through my door every week. Women selling their dresses. Sold a war shirt last month, a war shirt, mind you, scalp locks and all, for the price of a sack of flour. And it's still hanging in the back because nobody wants it." He tilted his head at her kindly. "Flour, salve, coal oil. Call it $1.40. It is worth more. To you, surely, and I'd not argue with you about it," he smiled. "But I've a shelf full of what things are worth to somebody, and a ledger full of what they fetch." She looked at the case on the counter, at the 4 rows of quill work, at the small worn place at the mouth of it where her mother's thumb had gone in and out 10,000 times. "Take it," she said. "Sensible." He turned to the shelves, and then, over his shoulder, in exactly the same tone, as though it were part of the same transaction, "You know, there's another way for a woman in your position." She did not answer. "I've a man freighting for me out of Bismarck. Widower, good wages, steady. He's asked me twice about a woman who can keep a house and doesn't talk his ear off." He set the flour on the counter. "He'd take the 2 of yours, not the sister's boy, he was clear on that, and I'd not lie to you about it, but the 2 of yours, and you'd all of you be warm by Christmas." The stove ticked. Outside, someone's dog was barking, on and on, at nothing. "No," she said, "it's no shame in it." "I did not say it was a shame. I said no." Rude nodded slowly, and there was nothing at all in his face, no anger, no offense, and that was the most frightening thing about him. "Well," he said, "the offer keeps. Cold weather's a great persuader. It's persuaded better than you and me both." She carried the flour and the salve and the coal oil home through a wind that had begun to carry snow in it, and she did not cry, because she had made a rule about that 4 winters ago, and she had not broken it yet, and because a rule is sometimes the only house a person has left to stand in. That night the whistle in Little Elk's chest got worse. She boiled water and put the camphor in it, and made a small tent of the blanket over his head and her own, and held him there in the steam, and he fought her, because he was 2 and did not understand, and then he stopped fighting because he was too tired, and that was worse. His body was hot and light in her arms, light as a bundle of dry sticks. She could feel each rib. Zitkala sat across the fire watching, her thumb in her mouth, which she had not done in 2 years. "Is he going to die?" the girl asked. Star Woman thought about lying. She thought about it seriously and for some time. "He is very sick," she said. I am going to do everything there is to do." That isn't an answer. No, it isn't. Ohia was at the door flap, looking out at the dark, his back to them. He had been standing there a long while. "Tate says there is meat in the north," he said. "She says the elk come down into the breaks when the snow gets deep. She says her husband used to take 4 elk in a week there when she was a girl. Her husband had 11 horses and 6 hunters with him. She says there is a valley, Grass Woman Creek. She says the wind goes over the top of it, and there is water that doesn't freeze all the way, and cottonwood and box elder for the fires, and nobody goes there because it is hard to get into." He turned around. In the firelight, his face was his father's face, and it went through her like a knife going in slow.
"How far is it?" 8 days, in good weather, with horses. We have no horses. It is off the reservation. There is no pass to leave the reservation. If we are found off the reservation, the soldiers do not have to ask us anything before they act." "So we stay here and he dies," the boy said. "And then in the spring Zitkala dies, and then you, and I will be last, and they will put me in the school and cut my hair, and I will be a person who used to have a family." Ohia. "Am I wrong?" And she opened her mouth to tell him that he was wrong, because that is what a mother does, that is the work. You stand between the child and the truth as long as your body will hold, and she found that she could not do it. She could not make the words come out of her mouth. Something in her had gone empty, and the emptiness had a sound like the whistle in a small chest. She sat with the child in her arms, and the steam going cold and the fire dying down, and she did not answer her son. Outside, the wind rose and ran along the canvas, and found every worn place, and came in, and touched her face. It was Tate who said the name. The old woman had come in the next morning to sit with the children while Star Woman went for wood, and she stayed after, the way she did, and they sat together with the little one asleep at last between them. "There is a man," said. "There are many men. None of them can feed us." "One of them can." The old woman's hands went on working. She was mending a moccasin with a bone awl and a length of sinew, and her fingers were bent like willow root, and she never once looked at what she was doing. "Mato Hota." Star Woman looked up. "Gray Bear is dead," she said. "Gray Bear is at the Big Bend, above the mouth of Little Timber, and he has been there since the summer of the surrender, and he has 40 pounds of dried meat hanging in his lodge, and 4 horses in the brush, and no one goes near him. No one goes near him because he killed his brother-in-law. That is one story. It is the story everyone tells. Everyone tells it because there is no one who will contradict it," Unchi said mildly. "That is not the same as it being true. I have lived 80 winters, and I have learned that the loudest story is usually the cheapest one. Someone had to be blamed for what happened at the crossing. He was standing closest. Unchi. He hunted for my husband's brother's family the winter of the deep snow, when he was 15 years old, and he brought them meat and would not take any of it, and he sat outside their lodge and ate snow. That is also a story. Nobody tells that one, because it is not interesting." She bit the sinew off with her side teeth. "You need meat, a horse, and a man the soldiers are afraid of. There is exactly one of those within 100 miles, and he is a bad-tempered, half-mad, dangerous man who does not want to see you." She set the moccasin down and looked at Star Woman for the first time, and her eyes were very clear. "Go and see him anyway." "With what? I have nothing to trade." Tate smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who has buried a husband and 6 children, and has stopped pretending that the world offers anything other than terms. "You have a family with no man in it," she said. "He is a man with no family. That is a trade, granddaughter. It is an old one. It is not a pretty one. It kept our people alive for 1,000 winters before anyone thought to make it pretty." The fire popped. Little Elk shifted in his sleep, and the whistle came, thin and steady, like something small trying to get in through a crack in a wall. Star Woman sat and looked into the fire for a long time.
"How far is the Big Bend?" she said. She went on the third morning after, and she went on foot, and she took Ohia with her because she could not leave him behind and be certain he would still be there when she returned. They left before light so that they would be past the police camp at the ford before anyone was up to see which direction they took. The snow had crusted overnight, and it held their weight for 3 steps, and then broke, and held, and broke, so that walking became a kind of argument with the ground that never ended. She had wrapped her feet in strips of an old blanket inside her moccasins. Ohia carried the axe, and she carried the little rawhide case with the last of the pounded meat in it. 6 pieces the size of her palm, which was all the food they had that was not needed by the 2 who stayed behind. They followed the river ice where the ice was good and the bank where it was not. Cold on the river is a different animal from cold on the flat. On the flat, cold is a weight, it presses. On the river, it moves. It comes down the channel with the current beneath it, and it pours over the ice, and it finds the space between a woman's blanket and her neck, and pours into that too. Twice they had to stop and beat their hands against their thighs until the feeling came back, and the feeling was pain, and the pain was welcome. Because pain meant the flesh was still living. At mid-morning they passed the burned-out ruin of a woodcutter's shack, and beyond it, in the willows, the frozen carcass of a horse with the hide cut away in a neat rectangle from the flank. Someone had needed rawhide badly enough to take it off a dead horse in the open, and had not stayed to take the rest. Oya looked at it a long time as they went by. "Whose was it?" he said. "Nobody's, now." By afternoon the sky had gone the color of a knife blade and the wind had turned into the north, and she began, very quietly, in the part of her mind that never stopped counting, to consider what they would do if the man was not there, or was there and turned them away, and they had to make the return in the dark with no food and no fire. "You have made a decision without letting yourself look at it directly," she thought. "That is what people do when the decision is bad, and there is no better one. You did not decide to ask a man to feed your children. You decided to walk to the Big Bend, and now the walking has decided the rest." The Big Bend was where the river turned hard to the west against a wall of gray rock and made a slack place on the inside of the curve, and in that slack place the timber grew thick, cottonwood, box elder, chokecherry brush along the cut banks. It was hard country to come at without being seen. That, she understood immediately, was why he had chosen it. They came up out of the willows at the mouth of Little Timber Creek in the late afternoon, and Gray Bear was standing in the open 30 paces ahead of them with a rifle in the crook of his arm, waiting. He had been waiting, she judged, for some time. She stopped and put her hand out, and Oya stopped beside her. He was a tall man, and thin in the way of men who eat when there is food and do not think about it when there is not. He wore a capote of trade blanket gone almost white with wear, and leggings, and a wolfskin cap, and there was a long healed scar that came down out of his hair above the left ear and ended at the jaw, an old one, pale, the kind a bullet makes when it goes by close enough to argue. His hair was cut short on one side and long on the other, badly, the way a man cuts his own hair with a knife. And there was gray in it, though he could not have been more than 38 winters. He did not raise the rifle. He did not need to. It was already pointed at the place where they were, which was the ground, which was the same thing. "Go back," he said. His voice was low and dry, and it did not carry the way a big voice carries. It arrived instead like a stone set down. "I have come to talk," she said. "I know why you have come. Women have come here before, 2 of them. Their families sent them because the families were hungry." A pause. The wind came up the creek and moved the brush. They went back too. "Hear me, and then I will go." "No." She stood in the snow and felt the cold going up through her feet, and she made herself think before she spoke, because the next words were the only ones she was likely to be given. "There is a child in my lodge who will die in 8 days," she said. His name is Hetaka Chikala. He is 2 winters. He is my sister's son, and my sister is dead of the coughing sickness in the summer, and the agency has not put him on the roll, and so as far as the government is concerned, he does not exist. And when he dies, nothing will be written about it. His chest whistles. You know that sound. Every man who has lived in a lodge knows that sound. Gray Bear said nothing. I am not asking you for pity, she said. Pity is worth nothing, and I would not know what to do with it. I am offering you a trade. You have nothing to trade. I have 4 hands that work, and a knowledge of every root and berry and bark between here and the Yellowstone. I can dress a hide in a day and a half, and I can make a lodge cover, and I can sew a winter moccasin that will not let water. I can cure meat so that it does not sour in a warm spell. I can find water where there is no water. I know the songs for the dead and the songs for a sick child, and the names of my grandmothers back 6 generations, and I know where the old camps were and which springs run in a dry year, because my mother made me learn them the way you would make a boy learn to shoot. She lifted her chin. You have meat and horses and no one to keep a camp. I have a camp and no meat and no horses. You are living like an animal in the brush, and I do not say that to insult you. I say it because it is true, and because you know it better than I do. The wind moved the brush again. Somewhere back in the timber, a magpie said something twice. Go on, Gray Bear said. Ongchi Tate says there is a valley in the north. Grasswoman Creek above the breaks. She says the wind goes over it. She says there is standing timber and a spring that does not freeze, and elk come down into it when the snow is deep. There is. You have been there? I wintered there twice, long ago. His eyes went past her, north, up the creek, and something moved behind his face and then stopped moving. It is off the reservation. 9 days on foot with children, 6 with horses if the weather holds, and the weather will not hold. Then 6 or 9 or 12, I am going. You will die on the way. Perhaps. We will certainly die if we stay. She let that sit. I want you to take us there. I want your horses and your gun and your knowledge of the country. In return, you will have a woman who works and 3 children who will work when they are able, and a fire that is lit when you come in, and someone to hold your head if you take a fever, and someone to bury you properly and say the words if you do not come back one day, instead of the coyotes having you in a draw with nobody to know. Gray Bear looked at her for a long moment. You are asking me to marry you, he said. I am asking you to make an arrangement. Whether we call it a marriage is for us to decide and no one else. There will be nothing between us that I do not agree to, and I am telling you now, plainly, that I do not agree to anything, and I may never. If that is the price you want, say so now, and I will walk back down the river and we will not speak again. She had thought she would be afraid to say it. She was not. There was a strange steadiness that came with putting a thing in the open where it could be seen. I don't want that, he said. I've not wanted that in a long while. Then we understand each other. No. He shifted the rifle. You don't understand anything yet, because you don't know what you're asking to stand next to. He looked at Ohia and then back at her. Has the boy heard what they say about me? He has. Then say it out loud, here, to my face. If you can't say it to my face, you can't live in the same camp as it. Star Woman felt her son go rigid beside her. They say, she said evenly, that at the crossing of the Powder in the retreat, you killed your wife's brother. Yes. The word went out into the cold and lay there. Do you want the rest? He said. Only if you want to give it. And that, she saw it, though it was very small, a movement in the muscle beside his eye. That was the thing that changed something. Not the offer, not the argument, the fact that she had not demanded. He was quiet for the space of perhaps 20 breaths. There were 9 of us, he said at last, and 4 were women, and 2 were children, and we were crossing at night in the high water because the soldiers were on the south bank and would come at first light. My wife's brother had the rope. He was 19. He was frightened, and being frightened made him angry, the way it does with young men who have been told all their lives that they must not be frightened. He said all of this in the same dry, level voice, as though reading a tally. He let go of the rope. Not from cowardice. He slipped. The rope came out of his hands, and it went out of mine, and the woman on the far end of it went down with her child tied to her back. And I went after them, and I got hold of his coat when he came past me in the water, and I put my hand on his head to push off him and get to the child. The magpie again, back in the timber. I got the child, he said. The child lived. That child is at the agency now, in the school, with her hair cut. And when I came out on the bank, there were 4 people standing there who had seen me put my hand on his head, and none of them had seen what I was reaching for. Star Woman stood in the snow with the wind coming up the creek. "And your wife?" she said. My wife believed them. He said it without emphasis. She had a right to. She was standing on the bank. She saw what they saw. A pause. She went south with her mother's people in the spring. She is alive. She has another husband, and I hope he is a better one than I was, which would not be difficult. He let the rifle down until the muzzle was in the snow. "So," he said, "that's what I am. I am a man who is guilty of exactly one thing, which is that I let go of a rope for the length of 2 heartbeats to reach a child, and there is not a person living who can prove that was what happened, including me. And I have stopped trying to explain it, because a man who explains himself over and over becomes a man who is always explaining himself, and I would rather be feared than pitied." He looked at her. "That is the man you want to put in your camp with your daughter and your sister's child?" And Star Woman thought, "He has told me this to make me leave. He has told me the true version, because the true version is worse for him than the lie, since the lie only makes him a killer, and the truth makes him a man nobody believed." She said, "Do you have coffee?" Gray Bear blinked. "What?" "Coffee. My son has walked 11 miles today and has eaten 1 piece of dried meat, and he is standing very straight so that I will not know that his legs are shaking. If we are going to talk about whether we can live in the same camp, we can talk about it by a fire." A long silence. Then Gray Bear turned and walked into the timber, and after 4 steps he said, without turning around, "Mind the deadfall on the left. There is a snare set under it, and it is not for rabbits." His camp was not a camp. It was a place where a man had stopped. He had built into the cut bank a low shelter of poles and hide and sod, dug back into the earth so that 3 sides of it were the hill itself, with the smoke coming out of a hole and dispersing along the face of the bank so that it did not rise where it could be seen. It was warm inside. It was very warm inside, and dark, and it smelled of grease and smoke and green hide and old man's tobacco. There was a bed of willow and robes along one wall. There was a stone-lined fire pit. There was a rack of dried meat hanging in the smoke, and it was not 40 pounds, as Unchi had said. It was perhaps 140, black and hard and good. Oya stared at it, and then stopped staring at it, and Star Woman watched her son take his eyes off that meat by force of will, and she felt something in her chest turn over. Gray Bear made coffee. He did it the way a man does a thing he has done alone 10,000 times, without a wasted motion and without offering to explain any of it. And he poured it into 2 tin cups and 1 horn cup, and gave the tin ones away, and kept the horn for himself. They drank. Nobody spoke for a while, and the silence was not comfortable, but it was not hostile either. It was the silence of 3 people who have not yet decided anything. 6 horses, he said finally. Not 4. 2 are no good for anything but eating. You would eat a horse? I have eaten a horse, twice. I would rather eat a horse than watch a horse eat the last of the browse while I starve beside it. He turned his cup. The valley is real. I will tell you what else is real. From here to there is 9 days with your people. 2 of those days there is no wood and no shelter, and if a storm catches us on that ground, we will not be having this conversation again. There is a soldier patrol out of the post that runs the North Road twice a month, and there is a man named Rude who runs whiskey up the same road, and the two of them have an understanding, and neither of them wants witnesses." He looked up. "And there is another thing. Some of our own people are police now, and they are paid in rations, and rations are what everyone is starving for. And a man who brings in a family off the reservation eats that month. I do not blame them. I want you to understand that I do not blame them, but you will not be running from strangers alone." "I understand." "You do not, but you will." He set the cup down. "Third thing, if I take you north, I do not come back. There is nothing here for me. So if we go as people who have left, and there is no returning to the agency in the spring to see your grandmother, and no beef issue, and no doctor, and no store. Whatever we cannot make or kill, we do without, forever." Starwoman thought about Unshi Tatate, 80 winters, mending a moccasin without looking at it. "I know what I am leaving," she said. "You think you do." But he said it without cruelty. "And the last thing, if we are married in front of people so that no one can say the children are unprotected, then it is a real thing in the eyes of the people, even if it is not a real thing in the robe. You will be the wife of a man they think is a murderer. Your daughter will be that man's daughter. That will follow her." "My daughter is 6 winters old, and last night I gave her water with flowers stirred in it and told her it was soup," Starwoman said. "Let it follow her. Let her be alive for it to follow." Gray Bear looked into the fire. Outside, the wind had risen and was going along the top of the cut bank with a sound like a hand dragged over hide. "You can stay," he said at last, "but this land knows no mercy." "It never did," she said. They were married on a Thursday, in the snow, in front of 11 people, and it took less time than boiling a pot of water. There was no feast because there was nothing to feast on. There was no giveaway because there was nothing to give. Unchi Tate stood as the eldest and said the words that made it a thing the people would recognize, that this woman came to this man with her children and her line and her grandmothers, and that this man came to this woman with his hands and his gun and whatever was left of his name. And Gray Bear brought a horse and put the rope in Star Woman's hand, because a man does not come to a woman empty even when he has nothing. And Star Woman gave him a pair of winter moccasins she had made in 2 nights without sleeping. And that was all of it. The 11 people who came were the ones who were not afraid of Gray Bear or were too old to bother being afraid. 3 of them would not look at him. One old man, a cousin of her husband's father, took Gray Bear by the forearm and said something into his ear that Star Woman did not hear. And Gray Bear listened and nodded once and said nothing back. There was a 4th person there she had not invited, Peter Bluecoat of the agency police, standing off at 40 paces in his blue coat and his brass buttons with his hands in his pockets, watching. He did not come closer, and he did not leave. When it was finished, he walked away toward the agency, unhurried, and she watched him go, and knew that within an hour the agent would know that the widow of Thunkong Sapa had married the man from the Big Bend, and that within 2 hours Malachi Rude would know it too. That night Gray Bear slept outside the lodge with his back against the north side of it and a robe over him, and would not come in. And in the morning there was 4 inches of new snow on him, and he shook it off like a dog and said nothing about it. And that was how it went for the first 19 nights. She did not thank him for it. She understood that thanking him would have made it into a favor, and he had not offered it as a favor. He had offered it as a fact, the way a man states the depth of a river. They left on the 9th night after, in the dark of the moon, and everything about that leaving had been argued over for 8 days. Gray Bear wanted to go light. He wanted the lodge left standing at the agency with a fire banked in it so that anyone looking would see smoke for another day. He wanted the poles abandoned, 17 good lodge poles, cut and trimmed and seasoned, worth more than anything else they owned, and he wanted them left in the snow. "Then what do we live in?" she said. "We cut new poles in the valley." There is standing lodgepole 2 days beyond it in the mountains. There is standing lodgepole 2 days beyond it, which means in the first blizzard we live in a hole in the ground. We will live in a hole in the ground. I have lived in a hole in the ground for 18 months. It is warmer than a lodge. It is warmer than a lodge for one man who does not care whether he wakes up, she said. I have 3 children. A child needs to be able to stand up in the place where he lives. A child who cannot stand up begins to think of himself as something that lives in a hole. He looked at her for a while. Bring 6 poles, he said. 6 will drag. 17 will kill a horse in the breaks. 10. 6. 8, and I will carry the parfleches on my own back the whole way and not put them on a horse. 8, he said, and you will not carry them, because a woman carrying 80 pounds walks slow, and slow is what kills people. He turned away. You argue like a man who has been to council. My father took me to council from the time I was 7 winters. He had no sons living. He said that a person who cannot argue is a person who will be handed things. Your father was right. He did not look around. 8 poles. They took the 6 horses, one of which was the mare he had given her, and which she named nothing, because you do not name a horse you may have to eat. 8 lodge poles dragged in 2 travois. The lodge cover folded. Robes 5, and 2 of them thin. 140 pounds of dried meat and a bladder of rendered fat. The flour, the coffee, what sugar was left. An axe, 2 knives, in all, sinew, a coil of rope, a kettle, 3 tin cups, a bar of lead and a mold and a powder horn, and his rifle, and her husband's old smoothbore, which had not been fired in 3 years, and which Ohia carried across his back like a man. And her mother's all-case. She had gone back to Rude's on the last day and put $1.40 worth of dressed rabbit skins on the counter, which had cost her 4 nights of work, and she had taken it back, and Rude had watched her do it with his head tilted. Going somewhere? He had said. Nowhere. He had wrapped the case in brown paper, which she had not asked him to do, and pushed it across the counter, and said, You know he was a scout for them. 2 seasons. Gray Bear. Rode for the army out of Fort Buford. She had not let her face change. Everyone scouted for someone, she said. That's so. That's very true, he smiled. I only mention it because a man like that has been in a great many places and knows a great many things, and men who know a great many things generally end up dead of it, and I not want to see a woman standing too near. She carried the all-case home under her blanket and did not tell Gray Bear about the conversation for 11 days. The last thing was Unchi Tate, and it was the worst thing. Star Woman went into the old woman's lodge on the last afternoon and sat with her, and neither of them said anything for a long time, and then Star Woman said, Come with us. No. There is room on a travois. You weigh nothing. You weigh less than the poles. I weigh 80 winters, the old woman said. I would slow you 2 days, and 2 days is the difference. And I would die on the 3rd night in the open, in the cold, with everyone standing around me feeling that they had killed me, and that is not the death I want, and I have earned the right to choose. She reached over and took Star Woman's hand in both of hers, and her hands were dry and light as paper. I want to die in a lodge on the river where my husband is buried, and I want the people who bury me to be people who know my name. That is not a small thing. That is what everyone out there is dying without. Unchi, listen to me. You are going to be the old woman someday. Someone is going to sit where you are sitting and beg you to come, and you are going to say no for the same reason. Her thumb moved over the back of Star Woman's hand. So learn now how it is done. It is done by letting the young ones go and not making it hard for them. Everything else is vanity. Star Woman put her forehead down on the old woman's hands. Tell me the names again, Unchi said. And Star Woman said them, her mother and her mother's mother, and hers, and hers, and hers, back 6 generations, the whole line, in the old way, with the places where each of them had lived and the thing each of them was known for. the one who could run down antelope, the one who saved the band in the year of no water, the one who married into the Sahiela and came back with the horse songs. It took a long time. Unchi Tate listened with her eyes shut and moved her lips along with the ones she knew. "Good," she said at the end. "Now teach them to your daughter, and do not wait until she is old enough to sit still, because you may not have that long. Teach them to her badly and early. She will fix them later." Then she said, "Go on now before I am foolish about it." Star Woman went out. She did not look back because the old woman would have wanted her not to, and because if she had looked back, she would not have been able to leave. The wind was coming down the river. The flag rope was slapping on the pole. Somewhere behind the storehouse a dog was barking on and on at nothing. They went out at moonset, and the country took them in. For the first 3 hours nobody spoke at all. Gray Bear went ahead on foot, leading. Then the 2 travois horses. Then Sitkala, wrapped and lashed on the mare like a bundle, half asleep. And Little Elk in the cradleboard on Star Woman's back, with his breath going in and out against her neck, hot and quick and whistling. Then Ohia, walking, with the smooth boar at the rear, because Gray Bear had said that the rear was where a man walks who is not afraid. And the boy had straightened up half an inch when he said it, and had not slumped since. The snow squeaked under the hooves. That was the only sound in the world besides the wind. Star Woman walked and thought. The stories say that leaving is a large thing, she thought. In the stories, a people leaves, and there is a song for it, and everyone remembers the day. This is not large. This is 11 feet and 24 hooves going north in the dark, and no song, and everyone we know asleep behind us. And in the morning, someone will look at our lodge and see no smoke and shrug. And by evening, our name will be a thing that used to be at the agency. And still, this is how it has always been done. This is exactly how it has always been done. Every one of my grandmothers walked out of somewhere in the dark. The only difference is that they were walking toward something that belonged to them, and I am walking toward a valley that belongs to a government that has never seen it. At the top of the first long rise, Gray Bear stopped and let the horses blow, and he stood looking back the way they had come, at the dark bowl of the river valley where the agency was, where there were perhaps 8 fires still burning among 200 lodges. He looked for a long time. "Do you want to say something to it?" she asked, coming up beside him. "No." A pause. "I said everything to it a long while ago, and it did not answer." He shifted the rope in his hand. "Your boy is limping. He has been limping for 2 miles. You saw. I see everything he does. He would rather I did not mention it in front of you." Gray Bear grunted. Then, after a moment, he unslung his own rifle and walked back down the line and held it out to the boy. "Trade," he said. "That old smoothbore is heavier, and it will not fire, and I want the weight tonight to keep my shoulder from stiffening." Ohia looked at the rifle. It was a Winchester, and it was worth 8 horses, and there was not a man at the agency who would have handed it to an 11-year-old boy in the dark. "Why?" the boy said. "Because I asked." The boy handed over the smoothbore and took the rifle, and he carried it the rest of that night as though it were made of eggshell, and he did not limp again where anyone could see. Star Woman watched this and said nothing at all. He knew, she thought. He knew that a boy will carry pain for pride, and that the only way to take the weight off is to make the boy think he is doing you a service. That is not the reasoning of a man who has lived alone in a hole for 18 months. That is the reasoning of a man who had children. She filed it away. She was, she had begun to understand, going to spend this whole journey filing things away. They made cold camp at first light in a coulee with no fire, and slept 4 hours, and moved again at noon. The second night the wind came out of the northwest with an edge in it, and the third day they crossed 12 miles of open flat where there was nothing standing higher than a man's knee in any direction, and Star Woman understood at last what he had meant about the 2 days with no wood. There is a particular fear that belongs to open ground in winter. It is not the fear of an enemy. It is the fear of being visible, of being the only vertical thing in 100 square miles of white, of knowing that anyone who happens to be on any ridge in any direction can see you and count you and decide about you, and that you will not know they have done it. She walked all that day with her shoulders drawn in and a crawling between them. At dusk on the 3rd day they came to the first shelter, a scatter of stunted ash in a draw, enough for a fire. Gray Bear made the fire in a hole, dug down 2 feet, with the light shielded by the bank on 3 sides, and it gave almost no warmth to anyone standing, and they crouched around it in a tight ring and boiled meat, and it was the best thing Star Woman had ever tasted in her life. Zitkala fell asleep sitting up with her mouth full. Ohia said, "How many more days like today?" "1," said Gray Bear. "Then broken country, which is harder to walk and easier to live in." "Good." "It is not good. In broken country you can be surprised at 50 paces." He turned a piece of meat with a stick. "Everything that shelters you also shelters what is hunting you. Remember that and you will live longer than most." The boy took this in with great seriousness. Star Woman was feeding Little Elk broth off her fingers, a little at a time, and the child was taking it, which he had not done in 4 days, and she was concentrating on that so hard that she did not at first hear Gray Bear say her name. "What?" "The whistle," he said. "It is lower tonight." She stopped. She listened. It was lower. It had come down out of the high, thin reed sound into something wetter and deeper in the chest, which was not good in itself, but which was different, and different, after 11 days of exactly the same, was a thing to hold on to with both hands. "It is the cold air," Gray Bear said. "Cold, dry air is better for that sickness than a smoky lodge. I do not know why. I know that it is so. I have seen it 3 times. And Star Woman, who had been awake for most of 19 days, and who had a rule about crying, sat by a hole in the ground with a fire in it, in the middle of a country that wanted her dead, and put her hand over her eyes for a moment. Nobody said anything about it. When she took her hand down, Gray Bear was looking at the fire, and had been looking at the fire the entire time, and went on looking at the fire, and after a while he said, in exactly his ordinary voice, "Tomorrow will be worse than today. Sleep." The storm found them on the 5th day. It did not come the way storms come in stories, with thunder and warning. It came as a change in the color of the light. All morning the sun had been a white coin behind cloud, and then at noon there was no coin, and the horizon in the northwest went the flat gray of a fish's belly, and the wind that had been in their faces died away entirely. Gray Bear stopped walking. He stood absolutely still in the middle of the flat, with the rope in his hand, and turned his head slowly, and Star Woman watched him do it and understood that he was not looking. He was smelling and listening. He turned back to the northwest and stood a moment longer. "How long?" she said. 2 hours. "Maybe 3. "Can we reach the breaks?" "No." He said it without any change in his voice, and then he was moving, faster than she had seen him move, and he was giving orders in short, flat pieces that were not requests. "Boy, cut the travois lashings on the 2nd horse, not the 1st, the 2nd. Woman, get the cover off the poles and spread it. Girl, sit down where you are and do not move and do not get up for anything." They built the shelter in a shallow swale where the ground dipped perhaps 4 feet below the level of the flat, which was the only feature in 11 miles. What they built was not a lodge. There was no time and no room for a lodge. Gray Bear drove the 8 poles into the frozen ground at a low angle with the back of the axe, in a long, narrow wedge shape like a fish's tail, with the point into the northwest, and they lashed the cover over it and weighted the edges with everything they had: parfleches, saddles, the kettle, chunks of frozen sod that Ohia cut out with the axe and dragged over one at a time until his arms shook. Star Woman packed snow along the windward side and up over the cover, a foot of it, 2 feet, packing it with the flat of a shoulder blade until her hands stopped being hands and became 2 blunt objects on the ends of her arms. The horses they brought in close and hobbled in the lee of the shelter, on the downside, where they would break the wind and where their heat would count for something. The storm arrived while they were still working. It arrived as a gray wall coming across the flat at the speed of a running horse, and Star Woman looked up and saw it come and had time for exactly one thought. So that is what it looks like. And then it was on them, and the world ended at the length of her own arm. They got inside, all of them, and the dog they did not have, and everything that could be dragged in. And then, for 2.5 days they lay in the dark and listened. There is nothing in a blizzard. That is the thing that cannot be explained to a person who has not been in one. There is no drama in it. There is no fight. There is only a noise that does not stop, hour after hour, a low, steady roaring with a higher note inside it that changes pitch and comes back, and the cover shaking, and the cold coming up out of the ground through the robes into the small of your back, and the smell of 5 bodies and horse and grease and urine in a space too small to sit up in. And there is time, terrible amounts of time. They lay in a row, with the children in the middle, Star Woman on one side, Gray Bear on the other, both of them on the outside where the cold was, and nobody had discussed that arrangement. It had simply happened when they crawled in, and it happened again the second night, and the third. On the first night, nobody talked. On the second day, Zitkala began to cry, not loudly, and would not say why, and it went on for an hour, and Star Woman held her and could feel the girl's whole body shaking with a kind of shaking that was not cold. "Tell me," she said. "I want to go home." "We are going home. We are going to a new home." "I want the old home. I want Unchi. I want to be where the walls do not move." And Star Woman held her and thought, there is no answer to this. There is no true thing I can say that will make this better. I could tell her that we will be safe, and I do not know that. I could tell her that Unchi is well, and I do not know that either. And if I lie to her now, and the lie is found out later, she will never believe me again about anything. And she is going to need to believe me about something very important someday. So she said, "I know. It is a bad thing, and I am sorry." And then, after a while, "Do you want the names?" And in the dark, in the roaring, she taught her daughter the line, her mother, and her mother's mother, and back, 6 generations, with the places and the deeds, over and over, the way Unchi had told her to, badly and early. Zitkala stopped crying somewhere in the 4th generation because she was concentrating, and by the 2nd hour she had 3 of them and had begun to correct her mother's order on purpose to be annoying, which was the best sound Star Woman had heard in a month. Gray Bear listened to all of it from the other side of the shelter and said nothing. But that night, when the children were asleep, he said out of the dark, "My grandmother's name was Chung Chakaka Wing. She was Titku Chacha on her mother's side. She could not walk after her 40th winter, and she was carried on a travois for 22 years, and she never once complained where anyone could hear it. And she made the best pemmican of anyone on that river, and when she died, 4 bands came." Star Woman lay listening. "That is the whole of what I know," he said. 4 generations back it stops. There was no one left to tell me the rest." "Why?" "Smallpox, in the year my father was small. It went through the band and took the old people first, because the old people go first, and the old people were where the names were kept." A pause. "Nobody thinks about that part of it. Everyone counts the dead. Nobody counts what died with them." The wind changed pitch and came back. "I will put your grandmother in with mine," Star Woman said. "When I say them to Zitkala, Changzaka Kawing, Titkutsacha, who could not walk and did not complain, and made the best pemmican on the river. There was a long silence from the other side. "You do not have to do that," he said. "I know I do not have to." He did not answer, and she did not press it, and in the morning neither of them mentioned it. But she said it that way to Zitkala 3 days later, and Gray Bear was standing at the horses when she said it, and he stopped what he was doing with his hands for a moment and then went on. On the third day the storm blew itself out around noon, and the silence afterward was so complete that it woke them. They dug out. The drift had gone over the shelter entirely, and they came up out of it into a world that was blue and white and utterly changed, with the sun out and the light off the snow so violent that Star Woman had to look at the ground through her fingers. Gray Bear cut strips of rawhide and made snow blinders for all of them, narrow slits tied at the back of the head, and Zitkala thought this was very funny and had to be told twice to stop taking hers off. One horse was dead. The old gray, the poorest of them, had gone down in the night, and the others had trampled the place where it lay. Gray Bear looked at it for a while. "Well," he said, "that is the meat problem answered." They butchered it there in the open, which took most of the day, and Ohia was sick behind the shelter and then came back with his face set and worked the whole rest of the afternoon without stopping. And Gray Bear made no remark about the being sick, not then and not ever, which Star Woman noticed. She worked the hide. It was frozen, and she had to thaw it in sections against her own body, which is as unpleasant as it sounds, and she scraped it with the flesher and rolled it and packed it, and the meat they cut thin and hung on the poles in the sun and the dry wind, which is the great gift of that country, that in winter the air itself will preserve meat if you give it 3 days and keep the ravens off. They did not have 3 days. They gave it a day and a half and packed it half dry and moved on. That night, over the fire, Ohia said, "I did not want to be sick." "No one wants to be sick," said Gray Bear. "You were not sick." "I was sick the first time. I was 14. It was a buffalo, and my uncle laughed at me, and I have not forgiven him, and he has been dead 19 years. He turned the meat. Being sick is the body objecting. It is a good sign. It means the thing you are doing is still a serious thing to you. The day you cut up a horse you have ridden and feel nothing at all, that is the day to be worried about. Ohia thought about this for a long while. "Were you sad for the horse?" "Yes." "So was I." "Then we will not say anything more about it," Gray Bear said, "and we will eat it, and it will carry us the rest of the way north, which is more than it could have done alive." They went into the broken country on the 7th day, and the character of the journey changed. The flat had been a place of exposure and distance. The breaks were a place of walls, clay, and shale hills cut into 1,000 pieces by 100 small drainages, buttes standing up on their own with juniper on the north faces, coulees that ran 2 miles and ended in a dry fall, ridges that promised a route and delivered a cliff. It was slow. 4 miles in a day was good. They doubled back 3 times in a single afternoon. But there was wood, there was shelter, there were tracks. On the 8th morning, Gray Bear crouched over a place in the snow at the head of a coulee for a long time, and Ohia crouched beside him, and Star Woman came up and looked and saw nothing at all, and then saw it. A faint dished place, a pressure mark, and another, going up the north slope. "Deer?" said Ohia. "Elk, cow, and a calf of last spring with her. 2 days old, maybe 3. See, the edge has gone soft and the wind has been at the inside. They are going up to the juniper to lie out of the wind." He stood. "That is the first food that has not come out of a par flesh in 8 days. Do you want to come?" The boy's whole face changed. "Yes." "Then understand this first." Gray Bear's voice went flat. "If you come, you do what I say when I say it, and you do not ask why until we are back at the fire. Hunting is not a thing where a man learns by discussing it. If I put my hand down, you go down. If I do not move for an hour, you do not move for an hour, and you will want to move at about the 40th minute, And that is the minute that decides whether we eat. Yes. And it will most likely come to nothing. Most hunts come to nothing. 9 days out of 10, a hunter walks a great distance and lies in the snow and comes home with wet leggings and no meat. And the songs do not mention that. They were gone 11 hours. Star Woman spent those 11 hours doing what women in that country have done since before there were words for it. She worked. And she did not let herself think about the time. She built up the camp. She cut brush and made a windbreak and set the cover over it properly for the first time in 4 days. She melted snow in the kettle, 6 kettles of snow for 1 kettle of water. And she thought about the streams at the agency and how a person could simply go and dip. She cut and split wood until she had a stack as long as her body. She checked the horses' backs for galls and found one starting on the black mare and packed it with grease and tallow. She held Little Elk over steam and listened to his chest and heard the wetness in it turning slowly, slowly into something less than it had been. She washed out what needed washing in water so cold it burned. She mended the knee of Zitkala's legging with sinew, and then, because the light was still good, she took out a scrap of hide and started a small thing she had not made in 4 years. The beginning of a quilled band. 4 rows, red and white and blue, in her mother's pattern. She looked at it for a while. I am making this for a man I have known for 5 weeks, she thought. I am making it because he stopped moving his hands when I said his grandmother's name. That is a foolish reason. She kept working on it. They came back at full dark, both of them, dragging the calf on a hide, and Ohia's face was so bright with cold and pride that Star Woman had to turn away and busy herself with the fire. He was still at the 40th minute, Gray Bear said. It was not much of a speech, but it was said in front of the boy's mother and sister, deliberately, in the way of a man who knows exactly how a thing of that kind lands and lasts. And Ohia carried it for a week. They ate the liver that night, and the tongue, and there was fat, real fat, the thing the body screams for after a month of lean meat. And afterward the 4 of them sat around the fire in a silence that was, for the first time since they had left, an easy one. Zitkala fell asleep against Gray Bear's leg. She did it by accident, sitting there, tipping slowly sideways, and by the time she came to rest it would have taken a deliberate movement to shift her. Gray Bear sat absolutely rigid, staring into the fire. He stayed that way for a long time. Star Woman watched from the other side and thought, he is afraid to move. He is a man who has killed and been shot at and lived alone in a hole for 1.5 years, and he is afraid of a sleeping child leaning on his leg. He does not know what he is allowed to have. You can put your hand on her head, she said quietly. She likes it. He did not look up. I would rather not, he said. Why? And for a moment she thought he was not going to answer at all, and then he said in that flat, dry voice, because it will be harder later. The fire popped. The wind came down the coulee and stirred the juniper and went away again. Harder than what? She said. Than it is now. He did not move his leg all night, and in the morning he had a stiffness in the hip that he did not mention, and when the girl woke and climbed off him and went to get water, he watched her go the whole way to the creek and back. They were 3 days out from Grasswoman Creek when they cut the wagon track. It was in the bottom of a wide draw where the going was easy, and it was fresh, 2 days, no more, and it was deep, a loaded wagon, iron tires, 4 mules, and the sign of 2 riders alongside. Gray Bear stood over it for a long time and did not say anything at all, and the not saying went on long enough that Star Woman came and stood beside him. Whiskey? She said. Whiskey up, hides and horses down. He crouched and put 2 fingers into a track. Going northwest. That is Rude's freight route to the Milk River posts, and it is not the road, it is a cutoff, which means he does not want the road. He stood. There is a thing I did not tell you. "That you scouted for the army out of Fort Buford," she said, "for 2 seasons." Gray Bear turned his head and looked at her. "Rude told me," she said, "the day I bought back my mother's awl case, 11 days ago. He told me, in the way a man tells you a thing he wants you to be frightened of." "And you did not ask me?" "I decided that if it mattered you would say it, and if it did not, my asking would only be a way of telling you I did not trust you, which I could not afford in the middle of open country in winter." She pulled her blanket up. "It matters now, so I am asking." He looked back down the wagon track. 2 seasons, he said. After the surrender. It was that or the ration line, and I could not stand in the ration line. A pause. I told myself I was not fighting our own people. I was only reading ground and finding water, and that was true for 11 months. And then one day in the 11th month it was not true anymore, and I put down the rifle and walked out of the post and went to the Big Bend, and did not speak to a living soul for 400 days. Star Woman said nothing. "That is the other thing they say about me," he said. "The killing they say I did not do. This one I did. And nobody talks about this one, because half the men at that agency have done the same or worse, and there is no story in a thing everyone has done." The wind came up the draw and moved the snow along the frozen ruts in thin white threads. "What did Rude want?" she said slowly, "telling me that." "He wanted you to be afraid of me. And when that did not work..." Gray Bear looked up at the ridgeline, north, in the direction the wagon had gone, and something in his face closed like a door. "When that did not work, he will have done the other thing." "What other thing?" "He will have found somebody who wants me," said Gray Bear, "and he will have told him where I have gone." They came into the valley on the 11th day, in the last hour of light, and Star Woman stopped on the rim and did not move for a long time. It lay below them, running east and west, perhaps 4 miles long and less than a mile across at the widest, and the north wall of it was a long rise of red rock and clay that took the wind off the whole country and threw it over the top, so that the valley floor sat in a pocket of stillness. There was timber, real timber, cottonwood along the creek in a dark, unbroken line, box elder in the side draws, and up on the shaded slopes a stand of pine and juniper. There was old grass standing above the snow, gold in the last light, in a country where every other blade had been eaten to the ground by the great herds of 10 years ago and by cattle since. And there was the creek, running black and open down the middle of it, steaming faintly where the spring came in, unfrozen in the last week of the moon of popping trees. Nothing moved down there except a small band of mule deer working along the far side, and 8 or 9 ravens over the west end, and the smoke of her own breath. This is the last one, she thought. This is one of the last places in this country where nobody has yet arrived. In 10 years there will be a road. In 20 there will be a fence and a man who believes he owns the water. But right now, tonight, there is nobody here, and my children are going to sleep in it. And I know I am seeing it the way a starving person sees food, which is not clearly. It is a hard, small, poor valley. There is no buffalo in it, and never will be again. We will work every day of our lives here, and some of us will die here of things a doctor could fix in a town. I do not care. She realized her eyes were running, and it was not the wind, and she wiped them with the heel of her hand before anyone saw. And it did not matter because Gray Bear was 10 feet away, looking out at the same thing, and his face had gone strange and open in a way she had not seen before. And Ohia was standing between them with his mouth slightly apart. And Zitkala was saying, "Is that it? Is that it? Is that the place?" over and over, and nobody was answering her. "Say something to it," Star Woman said quietly. And Gray Bear, who had refused to say anything to the agency, stood on the rim of Grass Woman Creek and said, in the old language, in a low voice, The short thing a person says on coming into a place where they intend to live. That they came as relatives, that they would take what was needed and not more, that they asked to be allowed. Then he said in his ordinary voice, "There is a bench above the spring with a spruce at the corner. That is the camp. Nothing floods there, and the smoke goes up the rock face and breaks apart before it clears the rim." And they went down. What followed were the best 6 weeks of Star Woman's adult life, and she knew it while it was happening, which is a rare and expensive kind of knowledge. They worked from gray light to full dark every single day. The first 3 days were the lodge. Gray Bear and Ohia went up into the pines with the axe and cut 9 new poles. 9, not 8, because the 10th thing he said when they got there was, "You were right about the poles," and did not elaborate, and that was as near an apology as the man was capable of. And dragged them down with a horse, and they raised the cover on the bench above the spring with the door to the east, and banked it with earth and snow all around, and cut a deep fire pit and lined it with flat stones from the creek. When it was up, Zitkala walked inside and stood in the middle and put her arms straight up over her head, as high as they would go, and looked at her mother. "I can stand up," she said. "Yes. All the way up. Yes." The girl did it again several times to be sure. After the lodge came the meat racks, the wood, 4 days of nothing but wood, 3 cords of it stacked along the north side of the lodge until the stack was itself a windbreak. And then the cache pit, dug down through frost into the dry clay and lined with grass and hide, where the dried meat would keep away from wolverine and fox. Star Woman set snares. She set them in a line along the willow bottoms and along the creek where the rabbit runs came down to water, 22 of them, and she walked that line every morning before light, and it produced 2 or 3 rabbits most days, and one day 11, and the 11-rabbit day was talked about for a year. She found the plants. That was the thing she could do that none of them could, and she did it with a kind of appetite that surprised her. Under the snow along the south-facing cut, she found the dried heads of wild bergamot, still holding scent, good for a cough. In the box elder drawer she found chokecherry and buffalo berry that the birds had left, frozen and sweetened. She dug prairie turnip out of frozen ground with a digging stick and the flat of the axe, 3 hours of work for 2 pounds, and made soup of it that tasted of earth and of every good summer she had ever had. She stripped inner bark from the cottonwood in strips for the horses when the browse got thin, and she boiled willow bark down to a bitter tea that she made all of them drink when the aches came. And Little Elk got well. It was not a moment. That was what she would remember later, that she could not name the day. It happened the way the ice goes off a river. Nothing, nothing, nothing. And then one morning you notice you have not heard the sound in a while. The whistle went out of his chest sometime in the 2nd week. In the 3rd week he began to eat like something with a hole in it. In the 4th he learned 4 new words, all of them shouted, and started following Ohia everywhere he went with the sober, determined stagger of a 2-year-old who has decided who his brother is. Star Woman came out of the lodge one afternoon and found the child sitting in the snow at Gray Bear's feet while the man worked to hide, and Gray Bear was talking to him, talking steadily in a low voice, the way you talk to a horse, explaining what he was doing with the flesher, every stroke, in complete sentences, to a boy of 2 winters who understood perhaps 1 word in 9. She stood at the door flap and listened. "And you go with the grain, always, because if you go against it, you will cut through, and then you have a hole, and a hole in a hide is a hole in a lodge, and a hole in a lodge is a cold woman shouting at you. So, with the grain. There, that is a hide." "Hide," said Little Elk. "That is right. Hide! Do not shout about it. It is not a shouting matter." Star Woman went back inside so that she would not be caught listening. In the evenings there was the fire. This was the part she had not expected. In the worst of the agency years, the evenings had been the hardest hours, the long dark with nothing to do but count what was gone. Here the evenings filled up. She quilled. She finished the band she had started in the breaks and started another, and taught Zitkala to sort the quills by size, which the girl did with an exactitude that bordered on cruelty toward the quills that did not measure up. Grey Bear worked on his gear, always. A man in that country is never finished with his gear. He remade the bridle. He cast bullets, 30 of them, sitting cross-legged with the mold and the ladle and the little fire, and let Ohia do the last 8 while he watched. He rewrapped the grip of his knife. He fixed the mare's gall with a poultice, and then rebuilt the saddle pad that had caused it, unpicking his own stitching and doing it again a different way. And he told stories, though it took 11 days before he did it the first time, and then it turned out that he had a great many. He told the old ones properly, in the right season, with the right formulas at the beginning and the end.
He told about Iktomi and about the girl who married the star, and he told them straight, without softening the parts children are not supposed to like. And Zitkala sat with her mouth open, and Oia pretended to be too old and did not miss a word. And once, near the end of the 6th week, he told a story that was not an old one. He told about a man who had had a wife and a son. He did not say it was himself. He told it in the 3rd person, the way the old stories are told, and nobody in the lodge moved or breathed wrong or looked at him while he did it. He said that the son had been 4 winters old. He said the son had died in the winter of the deep snow, not in a fight, not from soldiers, but of a fever that came in the night and was finished by morning. And that the man had been away hunting when it happened, and had come back with meat on the horse, and had seen his wife standing outside the lodge, and had known everything from the way she was standing, from 200 paces, before a word was said. He said that the man had put the meat down, and had gone away into the hills for 4 days, and that when he came back he was a different man, and a worse one, and that his wife had watched him become that, and had said nothing because she was busy becoming something else herself. He said that afterward, at the river crossing, when the rope came out of the young man's hands, and the woman went down with a child tied to her back, the man in the story had not thought about the young man at all. He had thought only, "There is a child in the water." And then Grey Bear stopped and turned a stick in the fire and said, "That is the end of that one." And everyone let it be the end. Star Woman lay awake a long time that night. So there it is, she thought. That is the whole shape of him. Everything I have watched him do for 2 months and could not account for. Why he handed the rifle to my son instead of telling him to rest. Why he will not put his hand on my daughter's head. Why he sleeps outside. He is not a dangerous man who is secretly kind. That is a story for children. He is a man who was ordinary and had everything taken, and who worked out afterward that the safest way to live is to be of use to people without ever letting them matter to you, because the second part is what kills you. And he is failing at it. He has been failing at it for 6 weeks.
I have watched him fail at it a little more every day, and he knows he is failing, and he is frightened of it, and he stays anyway. That is not nothing. That may in fact be the largest thing anyone has ever done for me. She turned over and looked at the smoke hole, where 3 stars were showing. He sleeps outside because he is waiting for me to tell him not to, she thought. And I have not told him. And I have not told him because if I tell him and then something happens to him, and something will happen to him, in this country, to a man who lives the way he lives, then I will have to bury a second husband, and I do not know if I am built to do that twice. So we are both of us standing in the cold outside a lodge that has room in it, for exactly the same reason. How stupid, she thought, with something that was almost affection. How stupid people are. On the 40th night she went to the door flap and said, into the dark, "It is going to 20 below. Come in and sleep by the door." There was a silence. "By the door," he said. "By the door." He came in and slept by the door, and it took him a long time to sleep, and she knew this because it took her a long time too. It was Ohia who found the sign on the 44th day, and the way he handled it was the proof that the winter had changed him. He did not come running into camp shouting. He walked in at his ordinary pace, put down the 2 rabbits from the snare line, drank water, and then said quietly to Grey Bear, "There is a place on the west rim where a man lay in the grass for a long time. The grass is pressed in 2 places, elbows. There is a boot print in the clay at the bottom of the draw where the sun gets it. One clear one, with a nail missing in the heel. And there is horse sign back of the rim, 2 horses, tied a long while. They have chewed the bark off a box elder as high as they could reach. Gray Bear set down what he was holding. How old? The dung is frozen through. 2 days, perhaps 3. Did you go up on the rim itself? No. I went along the bottom in the shadow and I looked up. I thought if I went up on the rim, I would be a shape against the sky, and if there was somebody still out there watching, then they would know that we know. There was a pause of about 3 heartbeats.
That, said Gray Bear, is exactly right.
Star Woman stood at the meat rack with a strip of elk in her hand and felt the whole valley change around her. The same rock, the same creek, the same 9 ravens, and all of it different. All of it now a place where she was being looked at. That night they did not build the fire up. 2 men, Gray Bear said low, watching a long while and not coming in. That is not a lost traveler, and it is not soldiers, because soldiers do not watch, they arrive. That is somebody counting us, counting how many guns, how many horses, and where the horses are at night. Wolfers, said Star Woman. There are wolfers out of the Milk River. Wolfers would have come in for coffee and looked around while they drank it. He turned his cup. It is Rude's men, or it is a man Rude has spoken to. Why would he trouble? We are 5 people in a hole in the ground. We have nothing. We have 6 horses and a good hide cache and a valley with water in it. He looked up. And we are off the reservation without a pass, which means we are, in the eyes of the law he can call on, already criminals. Anything done to us here is a thing nobody will ever be asked about. That is not an accident of our situation. That is the entire value of our situation to a man like him. He let that sit. And there is the other thing, he said, which is me. Elktooth, said Star Woman. Gray Bear looked at her sharply. His brother had the rope, she said. I have known that since the day I came to the Big Bend. I did not say the name because you did not. She set down her work. He is at the agency. He has been drinking Rude's whiskey for 2 years, and he owes Rude money he cannot pay, and he has told anyone who would listen for 4 winters that there is a debt on you. And now, a trader who wants a valley has a man who wants a killing, and the 2 of them have found each other, and that is not an accident either. Gray Bear was quiet a moment. You have been thinking about this for a long time, he said, since the 9th day. I think about everything for a long time. It is all I do while I am walking. She met his eyes across the low fire. So here is what I have thought. If they come and it is only the 2 of them, we can hold this camp. We have the rock at our back and one open approach, and you shoot better than anyone I have ever seen. If they come with 6, we cannot. And if they come with a soldier and a paper, we must not, because the moment one of us fires on a soldier, every one of us is done, including the children, including Zitkala. Yes. So it will not be a fight, it will be a talk. And a talk is a thing I am better at than you are. Gray Bear looked at her for a long moment across the fire. And something happened at the corner of his mouth that on another man would have been a smile. Say the rest of it, he said. The rest of it is this. Her voice did not change. You have been getting ready for 11 weeks to do a certain thing. I have watched you get ready for it. When they come, you intend to walk out to meet them alone, away from this camp, so that whatever happens, happens somewhere else. And then either you will kill them or they will kill you. And either way, the 4 of us will be standing in this valley with no man in it and a dead man's trouble on our heads. She leaned forward. You have decided this by yourself, and you have not said a word about it to me, and you were not going to. The fire ticked. No, he admitted, I was not. Then we are going to fix that tonight, said Star Woman, because I did not walk 200 miles in the snow to be a widow twice for a man's private arithmetic. They came on the 4th morning after, and they came in daylight, openly, up the middle of the creek bottom, which told Star Woman everything about how confident they were before she could make out a single face. There were 5. She was at the meat rack when Ohia whistled from the wood stack, 1 note, low, the signal they had agreed on and practiced 11 times, and she did not run. That had also been agreed. She put down the strip of elk she was holding, wiped her hands, and walked at an ordinary pace to the lodge door and said, into the dark, "Zitkala, take the little one and go up behind the wood, into the rocks, where I showed you. Take the robe. Do not come out for anything until I call you by both your names. Both of them. If someone calls you by one name only, that is not me." "How long?" "As long as it takes, and it will be cold, and you will be brave about it because you are the one I am trusting." The girl went, with the baby on her hip, and she did not cry. And Star Woman watched her daughter climb into the rocks with a 2-year-old and thought, with a strange, bright bitterness, "There is the childhood I have given her. She is 6, and she knows the difference between one name and 2. Then she went out and stood in the open in front of the lodge with her hands loose at her sides. Gray Bear came down from the horse ground on the left. He had the rifle, but he carried it in the crook of his arm, muzzle down, in the way that means, "I am not raising this yet," and he stopped 8 paces off her left shoulder, not in front of her. That had been agreed too, and it had cost an hour of argument. Oya was at the wood stack with the old smoothbore, which they had cleaned and which now, in fact, would fire. He was to stay there. He was not to come forward for any reason. He had promised. She did not entirely believe the promise, and neither did Gray Bear, and there had been nothing more to be done about it. The 5 riders came up the bench and stopped 40 feet out. Malachi Rood was in the middle, on a good bay, wrapped in a buffalo coat, looking around the camp with open pleasure, like a man arriving at a picnic. On his right was a soldier, a young lieutenant, perhaps 24, with a sparse mustache he had clearly been cultivating for some time, sitting very straight, cold to the bone and pretending not to be. 2 enlisted men behind him, older, bored, their carbines slung. And on Rood's left, a little apart, on a raw-boned pinto, was Elktooth. He was thinner than Star Woman remembered. There was a looseness in his face that had not been there 4 winters ago, and his hands on the reins were not steady, and he was looking at Gray Bear and had not looked at anything else since he came over the rise. "Well now," said Rood, "look at this. Look at what a person can make out of nothing in a season." He turned in the saddle, taking in the lodge, the wood, the racks, the horses. "That is a good stack of wood. That is honest work, that is. I always did say it. Didn't I say it, Lieutenant? There's no want of industry in these people, only want of direction." Nobody answered him. "Lieutenant Gaines," said Rood, "this is the woman I told you of, widow of Funkong Sapa. Speaks English better than half my clerks. And that man there is the one whose name I gave you." The lieutenant cleared his throat. He had a piece of paper. Of course he had a piece of paper. "You are absent from the agency without a pass," he said. "All of you. That's a violation. You'll gather your effects and you'll come back with us to Fort Buford, and from there you'll be returned to the agency, and the agent will deal with the matter." Star Woman let 3 full seconds pass before she spoke, because a person who answers instantly is a person who is frightened. "How many days' rations do you carry, Lieutenant?" she said. He blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "For your men, on this patrol, how many days?" "That's not 6. 6 days for 4 men. And you would take 5 more? And 2 of them are small children. 1 is 2 winters old, and the weather is turning. Look at the northwest. You can see it from where you are sitting. It is 11 days back to the agency, at the pace a 2-year-old can travel." She kept her voice absolutely level, the voice of a person discussing the price of freight. "You would arrive with 3 dead, perhaps 4, and then there would be a report, and the report would have your name on it, because it is your patrol. And the report would say that a lieutenant with 6 days' rations chose to move 5 hungry people through a February storm." The lieutenant's jaw tightened. "That is not—" "I am not threatening you. I am the only person here who is telling you the truth about your own situation. And you will realize that in about 2 hours, out on that flat, when it starts." She let a beat go by. "Send for a pass. It is a piece of paper. The agent gives them to families going to gather wood and to visit relatives. We are 5 people in a valley nobody wants, taking nothing from anyone, on land that the Treaty of the Fort Laramie Council called unceded hunting ground, and which no white man has ever put a plow into, and which— "That treaty's dead," said Rood pleasantly. "Congress killed it in '77. Whole Black Hills country signed away. By a paper that 10 men signed, when the treaty itself said it took 3/4 of the men of the nation," said Star Woman. "I was there when it was read out. I was 29 winters old, and I stood at the back, and I heard the interpreter say the words. If the law is a thing you are going to hold me to, Lieutenant, then it is a thing that can also be held to." There was a silence in the cold. The lieutenant looked, for the first time, genuinely uncomfortable, and Star Woman understood that she had found the one crack in him, which was that he was young enough to still believe that the law he served was a real thing. Rood saw it too. "Lieutenant," he said, and his voice had changed slightly, not louder, just faster. "We're wandering. There's a warrant matter here. That man—" "There is a warrant matter," the lieutenant agreed, seizing it with relief. He looked at Gray Bear. "You are named in a complaint. Homicide, on the Powder River, in the retreat of '76. Sworn out by—" He glanced at the paper and had trouble with the name. "By me," said Elktooth. It was the first thing he had said, and his voice came out cracked from cold or drink or grief, or all three. "He killed my brother," he said, in the old language, and then again in English, for the lieutenant. "He killed my brother. He pushed him under the water with his hand on his head. 4 people saw it." And Gray Bear, who had stood without moving through all of it, who had not spoken a single word since the riders came over the rise, said quietly, "Yes, 4 people saw it." Star Woman's stomach dropped. "Then you own it," said the lieutenant. "I own what happened. I do not own what they think happened, but I have stopped arguing about that." Gray Bear's eyes were on Elktooth and had never left him. "Your brother's name was Wawayaka. He was 19. He had a bay horse with a white face, and he was the fastest runner in 3 camps, and he could not swim, and he was ashamed of it, and he never told anyone but me because I taught him to swim in the summer he was 12, and he never learned properly, and we agreed to say nothing about it." Elktooth's face changed. "That is why I put my hand on his head," Gray Bear said. "Not to push him down, to find him. He had gone under in the dark and I could not see, and I put my hand out and what I found was his head, and I got hold of his coat and he was fighting me the way a man who cannot swim fights, with both arms, straight down, and there was a child going past me in the water with her mother tied under her." He stopped. "And I let go of your brother and I took the child." The wind moved along the rock face above the camp. "I have never said that out loud to anyone but the woman standing behind me," Gray Bear said. "I am saying it to you now because you are the only person alive who has a right to hear it. And I am not saying it so that you will forgive me. There is nothing to forgive, and there is everything to be sorry for, and those are 2 different things, and I have had 4 winters to learn the difference." Elktooth sat on the pinto with his mouth slightly open. "You are lying," he said, but there was nothing behind it. "He could not swim," Gray Bear said. "Ask your mother whether he could swim." And Star Woman watched a man's whole architecture come down, right there, on a raw-boned horse in the cold. Watched 4 years of a thing he had built his entire remaining life on, tilt and start to go. And she understood, with a clarity that made her cold, that this was the most dangerous moment of the entire morning. Because a man does not stand quietly and let that happen to him in front of witnesses. A man reaches for something. "Gentlemen," said Rood into that silence, "we're all of us freezing. Let me put a simpler proposition." He leaned forward on his saddle horn. "There's no need for anybody to go anywhere," he said. "Lieutenant, I'd suggest the warrant's a weak business, 4 years old, out of a fight in a war, no white witness, no jury in Dakota's going to sit on it. I'd let it lie." He turned to Star Woman. "And you can stay, right here. I'll square the pass with the agent myself. I've done it 100 times. It's a letter and $1. You can have this valley." Star Woman waited. "For what?" she said. "Well, now," Rood smiled. "I've a freight cutoff runs 2 miles north of your rim, and it's a bad road. And it's a bad road chiefly because there's no water between the Little Timber and the Milk in the dry months, excepting one spring, which is yours." He nodded at the creek. I'd want the use of the spring. I'd want a corral built, you've the timber and the hands, and a man to hold stock in it and swap out mules for my freighters. Twice a month. I'd pay in rations and goods, and I'd pay well, better than the agency, and you'd have coffee and powder and lead and cloth, and a doctor's medicine when the young one takes sick again, and he will. He spread his clean hands. And nobody would ever come up this creek to trouble you, because everyone in 400 miles would know you were mine. And there it was. Star Woman stood in the snow in front of her lodge and looked at the offer, and it was, she understood immediately, a very good offer. That was the horror of it. It was not a trap with a visible tooth. It was warmth and lead and medicine and safety, and her children fed, and it was the same offer he had made her across the counter in the winter, dressed differently, and it would be made again in some other form every year of her life until she died.
And in 3 years, she thought, there would be a store here, and in 5, a road ranch, and men in it, and whiskey moving through. And my daughter would be 12, and there would be freighters camped at our spring twice a month, and I would spend every night of my life awake listening. And Gray Bear would be a man who holds another man's stock, which would kill him inside of 2 winters, and he would take to drinking, or he would take to going out at night, and one of those 2 would finish it. And the valley would not be ours. It has never once, in the whole history of this, been possible to keep a thing by being useful to the man who wants it. My grandmother's people were useful. We were the most useful nation on this river for 60 years. We fed them, we guided them, we married them, we made them rich in furs, and here I stand. She said, "No." Rude's eyebrows went up. "Now don't answer quick." "I have thought about it for 4 winters," she said. "You have simply not been present for the thinking. You'll not get a better offer in this country." "That is true. That is exactly why I am refusing it." Her voice stayed level. "Because a woman who takes the best offer available to her in a bad country has agreed that the country should be that way. And I have 3 children who will remember what I did on this morning, and one of them is standing behind me holding a gun, and one of them is in the rocks up there listening to every word, and I am not going to be the grandmother in their story who sold the water." And Malachi Rude, for 1/2 of 1 second, no longer, stopped smiling. It was the only time she ever saw it. And in that half-second she saw the whole man underneath, and he was not a devil, and he was not even particularly cruel. He was simply a person who had discovered early that everything in the world could be bought if you found the price, and who had built a life on it, and who could not tolerate the existence of an exception, because an exception was an argument that his entire life had been a mistake. "Elk-tooth," he said, without turning his head. "You came up here for a reason. Are you going to do it, or are you going to sit there?" And that was the moment it went wrong, because Elk-tooth, who had been sitting for 4 minutes with his whole life coming apart in his hands, was given something to do. And a man in that condition will take the thing he is given, because doing anything at all is easier than continuing to sit there and know. He went for the carbine under his leg. What happened next took perhaps 2.5 seconds, and Star Woman saw all of it, and would see all of it again for the rest of her life, usually at about 3 in the morning. Gray Bear did not shoot him. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. Gray Bear's rifle came up. She saw it come up, faster than she would have believed a human arm could move, and he had Elk-tooth cold, dead, finished, at 40 feet, and he did not fire. He shouted, in the old language, one word, "Hold." And one of the enlisted men behind the lieutenant, a bored 20-year-old from Ohio, who had been sitting on a cold horse for 4 hours, and who saw a rifle come up in the hands of a man he had been told that morning was a murderer, fired his carbine. The sound of it hit the rock wall and came back twice. Elk-tooth's pinto went sideways. The lieutenant was shouting. Rude's bay reared. And Gray Bear took 1 step backward, and then another, and then sat down in the snow with the rifle across his knees, looking mildly surprised, and put his hand flat against his side just below the ribs, and looked at his hand.
Star Woman was already moving. Behind her, from the wood stack, she heard Oya scream. Not a word, just a sound. The sound of an 11-year-old boy watching it happen a second time. And she heard the boy's feet in the snow, and she turned her head and shouted, in the voice she had used exactly twice in her life, "Oya, do not!" And her son, with the smoothbore already coming up, with 4 soldiers in front of him and every reason in the world, stopped. He stopped. She would think about that too for the rest of her life. Of everything that happened on Grasswoman Creek that morning, that was the one she was proudest of, and it was not hers. The lieutenant was off his horse. He was shouting at the enlisted man, and his voice had gone up into a register he would be ashamed of later. And the enlisted man was saying, "He brought it up, sir. You saw him bring it up," over and over, in the flat, mechanical way of a young man who has just done something he cannot undo. Star Woman was on her knees in the snow with her hands under Gray Bear's coat, high in the side, through the meat below the lowest rib, in and out, in at the front and out at the back, and the exit was ragged and the blood was coming steadily, but it was not coming in a rhythm, which was the one thing she was looking for and the only good news available. "It has gone through," she said. "Yes," said Gray Bear. His voice was thin. "I felt it go." "It has not hit the great vessel. It may have hit the gut, and if it has hit the gut, you will die of it in 4 days, and there is nothing anyone can do about that, and I am telling you now because you would ask." "Yes," he agreed, and then, "Where is the boy?" He stopped. He did not fire. Gray Bear shut his eyes. "Good," he said, "good. That is—" and he did not finish it. She was packing the wound with a handful of clean, tanned hide shavings and pressing it hard with the flat of her hand, and she looked up, and Elktooth was standing over them. He had gotten off the pinto. He had the carbine in his hands, and it was pointed at the ground, and he was looking down at Gray Bear with an expression that was not triumph. There was a very long moment. "He could not swim," Elktooth said. It came out of him almost as a question. "No," said Star Woman, "he could not." "My mother—" He stopped. He tried again. "My mother said to me once that he was afraid of the crossings, that when we were small he would go far up and around to find a shallow place and be late, and be beaten for being late, and never say why." He was breathing badly. "I have carried this for 4 years." "I know. What am I supposed to do with 4 years?" And Star Woman, kneeling in bloody snow with both hands on a dying man's side and her children in the rocks above her, looked up at him and said the only true thing available. "You are supposed to put it down and help me carry him inside, and then you are supposed to live the rest of your life. That is all any of us get. Nobody is given the 4 years back." They carried him inside on a hide, 4 of them, Star Woman at the head, Elktooth at the feet, and the 2 soldiers at the sides, because the lieutenant ordered it, and because there was nothing else for anyone to do. Ohia held the door flap. His face had gone the color of ash, and he had not put down the smoothbore, and when the men had carried Gray Bear past him and laid him on the robes, the boy went outside and stood at the wood stack and was sick, and then came back in and sat down at the man's head, and stayed there for the next 4 days. Star Woman worked. That was the mercy of it. There was so much to do that she did not have to feel anything until the 3rd night. She cut the coat and the shirt away and washed both wounds with water she had boiled and cooled, and she packed them with a poultice of pounded root and the inner bark she had gathered in the 1st week, which her mother had used, and her mother's mother, and which she believed in the way a person believes in a thing that has worked 7 times out of 10. She bound him with strips of a clean trade blanket. She built the fire up and kept it up. She took the girl and the baby out of the rocks after 2 hours, and Zitkala came down blue-lipped and shaking and did not cry until she was inside, and then cried for a long time, and Star Woman let her. The lieutenant did not leave. That surprised her. She had expected them to go, to ride out and leave the mess behind them, on the theory that a mess on the wrong side of an unmarked line was nobody's mess at all. Instead, Lieutenant Gaines had his men make camp on the flat below the bench, and he came up twice that afternoon and stood outside the lodge with his hat in his hands like a man at a church door. The second time, he asked to come in. She let him. He crouched inside the door, too tall for it, awkward, his sword getting in his way, and looked at the man on the robes and at the children and at the fire. "Will he live?" he said. "I do not know. If the bullet has opened the gut, he will be dead in 4 days, and there will be a smell before that, and he will burn with fever. If it has only gone through the meat, he will be very weak for a month, and then he will be a man with 2 scars. "Is there?" He stopped. "The post has a surgeon. 11 days. He would die on the 6th. Gaines nodded slowly. He turned his hat around in his hands. "Private Kell is 19 years old," he said. "He has been in this country 5 months. I don't—" He stopped again. "I want to say something to you that will be of some use, and I find that there isn't anything." "No," Star Woman agreed. "There is not." That man had his rifle up. That man had his rifle up and did not fire it, at 40 feet, on a man who was drawing on him, which is a thing your Private Kell could not have done, and which you could not have done, and which I could not have done. She did not raise her voice. She was mixing a poultice while she said it, and did not stop. He shouted a word. The word was hold. He was trying to keep everyone in this valley alive, including the man who came here to kill him. And your private shot him for it. I want you to carry that out of here with you, Lieutenant, not as a punishment, because it is true, and because you are young, and because in 10 years you will be the one giving the orders. And on that day, I would like you to remember what a warrant and a nervous boy and a traitor's word cost on this creek." Gaines was quiet for a long moment. "The warrant," he said finally, "is a civil matter out of Dakota, and it is 4 years stale, and the complainant," he glanced toward the door, toward the place on the flat where Elktooth had been sitting alone against a cottonwood since noon, "has just informed me that he does not wish to press it, and will swear to that in front of the agent." Star Woman's hands stopped. "There is also," said the lieutenant, "the matter of an unauthorized discharge of a weapon by a member of my command, resulting in the wounding of a man who had not fired, in the presence of 2 civilian witnesses, one of whom is Mr. Rood." He turned the hat around again. "Mr. Rood has been very anxious these last 3 hours that everyone should agree on what happened." "Yes," said Star Woman, "he would be." "He has proposed that the report should say the party was fired upon." "And what will your report say?" And Lieutenant Gaines, 24 years old, cold to the bone, with a mustache he was cultivating and a career in front of him, looked at the fire for a while. "It will say what happened," he said. "It will not do you any good. Nothing will come of it. It'll go in a drawer at Buford and another drawer in St. Paul, and no one will ever read it." He stood, stooping under the poles. "But it will say what happened. That's the whole of what I have to give you, and I know exactly how small it is." At the door he stopped. "About the pass," he said. "I'll write to the agent. I'll say that I found this family peaceably settled, self-supporting, drawing no rations, on land not surveyed and not claimed, and that in my judgment their removal in winter would cost lives, and that I recommend a pass be issued and renewed." He put his hat on. "He may refuse. Agents do as they like. But a written recommendation from an officer is a piece of paper in a file, and a piece of paper in a file is worth more in this country than 100 true things nobody wrote down. You'd know that better than me." "I would," said Star Woman. "Thank you." And then, because she was her father's daughter and had been taken to counsel since she was 7 winters old and did not intend to waste a man in a giving mood, write also that the spring on this creek is the water supply of the family settled here, and that its use by freight outfits would deprive them of it. Put that in the same letter. Make it a separate sentence with its own number." Gaines looked at her. Then, for the first time that day, something that was almost a smile. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Rude left the next morning, and he came up to the lodge before he went. He did not dismount. He sat his bay in the gray light with the whole valley behind him and looked down at Star Woman where she stood at the door with her sleeves pushed up and blood dried under her fingernails. "You'll want to think about the winter after this one," he said. "I think about nothing else." "He'll not hunt again this season, perhaps not next. That boy's 11, and he's a good boy, but he's 11. He settled his gloves. "Offer keeps. It always keeps. That's the nature of it." "I know." "You're a hard woman." "I am a woman who has been told what she can have by people like you since I was a girl," she said. "You are not the first, and you will not be the last, and the ones after you will be worse, because they will bring their wives and their churches, and they will believe they are doing me a kindness." She looked up at him steadily. "Ride out of my valley, Mr. Rude." He touched his hat. "Ma'am," he said, and turned the bay and went, and she watched him all the way down the creek and out of sight. And then she went inside and sat down very suddenly on the robes, because her legs had stopped working. Elktooth did not go with them. He stayed at the cottonwood below the bench through the whole of that first day and the night after it, sitting in the cold with his blanket over his head. And in the morning Star Woman went down with a cup of broth and put it beside him, and did not speak, and went back up. At midday he came to the lodge. "I want to see him," he said. "He is sleeping." "I want to see him anyway." She let him in, and she stood by the fire with her hand near the axe, and she was not ashamed of that, and did not pretend otherwise. Elktooth crouched by the robes and looked at Gray Bear's face for a long time. The fever had come up in the night. The man's lips were cracked, and his breathing was shallow, and the whole left side of his body under the blanket was one great bruise, gone the color of a rain cloud. "By our law," Elktooth said without looking up, "a killing is not settled by killing. You know this. Everyone knows this, and everyone has forgotten it, because the agency courts them out of it and calls it savage." His voice was low. "By our law, the man who caused a death makes it good to the family. He gives horses. He gives what he has. He takes the dead man's obligations on himself, the widow, the mother, the children if there are children. He becomes in the place where the dead man stood, the one who provides. That is how it is settled, and after it is settled, nobody may speak of it again. And if a man speaks of it again, he is the one who has done wrong." "I know the law," said Star Woman. "He offered it." Elktooth's jaw worked. 4 years ago, before he went to the Big Bend. He came to my mother's lodge with 4 horses and stood outside it. And I came out, and I turned the horses away, and I said words to him in front of 11 people that I am not going to repeat in a lodge where there are children. He drew a breath. He never came again, because a man may only offer once. That is also the law. The fire ticked. "I have thought since yesterday," Elktooth said, "about what I would have done in that water, with my brother in one hand and a child going past. And I have not been able to find an answer, and I have been looking for it since the sun came up." "There is no answer," said Star Woman. "That is what makes it the kind of thing it is. If there were an answer, he would be a criminal or a hero, and he is neither. And that is why nobody could bear it. Not you, not the 4 on the bank, not him." Elktooth put his hand flat on the ground beside the robes. "When he wakes," he said, "tell him the horses are turned back. Tell him I said it in front of you, which makes it said." He stood. "And tell him—" He stopped. "No," he said, "I will tell him myself. I will come back in the summer and tell him myself. And if he is dead, I will tell it to his grave, which is worth less, but is not nothing." He went to the door. "There is one more thing," said Star Woman. He turned. "Rude will not let you go," she said. "You owe him money, and you know what he moves on that road, and now you know what he tried to buy here. and you have just refused to be his knife in front of a soldier.
You cannot go back to that agency and stand in his line for the rest of your life." Elktooth said nothing. "There is a valley here," she said, "with more work in it than 4 hands can do, and a man in it who will not lift a rifle before next winter, and a boy who needs to be taught to hunt by somebody, and I do not have a man to spare." He stared at her. "You would have me in your camp." "No, I would rather have almost anyone else in my camp. I will be watching you for 2 years, and you will feel it, and it will be unpleasant for both of us." She met his eyes. "But you came here in another man's pocket, and you got out of it, which is more than most people manage, and my grandmother told me once that the loudest story about a person is usually the cheapest one. So I am doing what she told me to do. I am asking anyway." Elktooth stood in the doorway of a lodge belonging to the man he had come to kill. "I will cut wood," he said at last, roughly. "I will not sit in here. I will camp below at the cottonwood." "Cut wood, then." He cut wood for 9 days. He cut an appalling amount of wood. The way a man works when working is the only apology he has the words for. And on the 4th day he brought in a deer, and on the 7th he mended the corral rails without being asked, and he did not once come up to the lodge unless he was called. The fever broke on the 4th night. Star Woman had not slept in 3 days. She had reached the place past exhaustion where the mind goes very clear and very slow, and the walls of a lodge seem to breathe. She had changed the dressings 11 times. There was no smell. She had put her face down close to the wound 4 times a day and breathed in, looking for the Swedish rot that would tell her the gut was opened, and there was no smell. And on the 4th night the heat went out of his skin all at once, the way heat leaves a stone after sundown, and he opened his eyes and looked at the smoke hole and said, in a voice like a door dragging, "Is the boy all right?" Star Woman put her hands over her face. That was the 2nd time she broke the rule about crying, and this time she did not stop for some while. And Gray Bear lay and let her do it. And after a long time he moved his hand, 2 inches, which was all he had, and put it against her knee, and left it there. "You are a great fool," she said when she could. "Yes." "You had him. You had him, and you did not fire." "No." "Why?" Gray Bear was silent for so long she thought he had gone under again. "Because your son was watching," he said. The fire moved. Outside, the wind came over the rim of the valley and went across the top of it, and did not come down, which was the whole reason there was a valley worth living in. "He is 11, said Gray Bear. "He has already seen his father taken. If he had watched me kill a Lakota man in front of the lodge, our own people, at 40 feet, over an old thing, then that would have been the picture in his head for the rest of his life, and every hard year afterward he would have gone back to it, and one day he would have used it. That is how it goes on. That is the whole machine of it. Somebody's boy watches, and then 30 years later, somebody else's boy watches him." He closed his eyes. "I have been that boy. I would rather be shot." Star Woman sat with her hand over his. "You were, though," she said. "Shot." "Yes," said Gray Bear. "The reasoning was sound. The arithmetic was poor." And she laughed, one broken, undignified sound, the first laugh in that lodge since the 11 Rabbit Day, and clapped her hand over her mouth so as not to wake the children. And Gray Bear lay in the firelight and watched her do it with an expression she had never seen on his face before, and would spend the next 20 years learning to read. He was a bad patient. She had expected this, and it was still worse than she expected. For 11 days he could not sit up without help, and he hated it the way a horse hates a rope. And he lay on the robes with his jaw set, and watched a woman and a boy and a man he had once nearly killed do the work of keeping him alive. And every hour of it took something out of him that had nothing to do with the hole in his side. On the 12th day she found him standing. He had gotten himself upright by the lodge poles, gray-faced, sweating in a cold lodge, with his hands splayed against the cover, and the bandage had gone red through. "Sit down." "No. You have opened it."
Yes. He was breathing in short pulls. I know what I have done. I am doing it on purpose. Then you are a fool as well as a bad patient. Listen to me. He got the words out 3 at a time. I have watched a man take 4 months to die of a wound like this, on a bed, in a lodge, at the Standing Rock. Nothing wrong with the wound closed. What killed him was 4 months of lying still. The blood thickens, the lung fills. He drowned in his own bed in the 3rd month, and it took him 9 weeks, and he was 31 years old. He shut his eyes and opened them. Every day I lie there, I lose a piece of what I will need in the spring. So I am going to stand up today for the time it takes to count to 100, and tomorrow 120. And I am going to bleed a little while I do it, and you are going to let me. Star Woman stood with her arms folded. 90, she said. 100. 90 today, and I will hold your arm, and if you go down, I will not catch you. I will let you go down so that you learn something. 90, he agreed. She held his arm. He counted out loud, and his voice shook by 40 and was barely there at 70, and at 84 Zitkala came in from outside, took one look and, without a word, with the ferocious practicality of a 6-year-old who has decided a thing is her job, walked over and put her small shoulder under his other hand. Gray Bear looked down at her. He did not take his hand away. 90, said Zitkala, who could not count to 90 and had simply decided that the counting was finished. The winter went out slowly, the way it does in that country, in false starts and betrayals. There was a warm week in the moon of the sore eyes that took the snow off the south slopes and put water running in every draw, and everyone said the winter was breaking, and then it came back for 11 days with a cold that split 2 of the cottonwoods along the creek with a sound like a rifle in the night. Zitkala woke screaming at the first one. Star Woman held her and explained about the sap freezing and the wood splitting, and the girl listened and stopped shaking and then said, with great scorn, "That is a stupid way for a tree to behave," and went back to sleep, and Star Woman lay awake grinning at the smoke hole like an idiot. Elktooth stayed at the cottonwood below the bench. He built himself a brush shelter that was too small and too cold, and refused a robe twice and took it the 3rd time. He and Gray Bear did not speak to each other for 19 days. On the 20th, Star Woman came around the wood stack and found the 2 of them standing side by side, looking at the black mare's off forefoot, arguing quietly and technically about an abscess, and neither of them looked up, and she went away again without being seen. That was how it healed, not with a speech, with a hoof. Oia became, over that spring, something Star Woman could hardly look at directly. He ran the snare line. He took the horses down to water morning and evening and brought them up, and he handled them the way his father had, standing at the shoulder and talking low. Elktooth taught him to shoot properly, which was a thing Star Woman had to sit with for a while before she permitted it, and she permitted it, and then she went into the timber alone and stood there for a quarter of an hour with her hand over her mouth. He killed his first deer in the moon of grass appearing, at 110 paces, and he did all of it right. He sat with it afterward, and said the words, and did not hurry, and brought it in whole, and gave the first of it away to Elktooth, who was not family, which is the older and harder courtesy. When he came into the lodge that night, he was not the same shape. Something had unclenched in his back that had been clenched since the day the word came from Slim Buttes. "Your father," said Star Woman, "took his first deer at 12, and he told the story wrong for the rest of his life. And every year the distance got longer." Oia thought about that. How long was it really? 40 paces, downhill, and it was already lame. The boy laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh in 19 months, and it startled all of them. And Little Elk, who was 2.5 and who had no idea what was happening, laughed too, enormously, from the belly, because his brother was laughing, and then would not stop, and had to be taken outside. In the moon of ripening berries, a man came up the creek with a paper. He was an agency policeman, and he was not Peter Bluecoat,
and he was tired and bored and had ridden 9 days, and he handed the paper to Star Woman without dismounting because he had been told the woman there could read. She could not read. That was one of the things Rude had been wrong about. But she had learned, in 4 winters at an agency, to recognize the shapes of certain words the way a hunter knows tracks, and she found the one she was looking for on the second line. And then she made the policeman read the whole thing out loud twice. It was a pass. It was issued to the widow of Tongkang Sapa and family, 4 persons and 1, for the purpose of gathering and hunting in the district of the Little Timber, renewable at the discretion of the agent, and it was signed, and there was a stamp on it, and at the bottom there was a sentence, its own sentence, with its own number, noting that the spring at the head of Grasswoman Creek was the domestic water supply of the family named above. It was worth almost nothing. She knew that. A pass could be revoked by the same hand that wrote it on a bad morning for no reason, and in 10 years there would be a survey, and in 15 a homestead entry, and no sentence with a number on it would stop any of that. She folded it and put it inside her mother's awl case, in with the sinew and the quills, in the 4-row pattern, and she thought, "It is a small, poor thing, and I will keep it, and I will keep the next one, and my daughter will keep them after me, and when they finally come up this creek with their surveyors, we will have a box of paper, and that is the only kind of weapon we have left that they respect." The policeman took his coffee and gave them the news of the agency, which was mostly bad. The beef issue had been short in March, and there had been a bad month. A school had opened at the mouth of the Grand, and children were being taken. Malachi Rude had sold his interest in the store and gone up to the Milk River country, where there was a new post and new business, and there was a story going around that his freight cutoff had been closed to him by the Army over a whiskey matter that nobody could quite pin down, and that he had said some hard things about a lieutenant. And Unchi Tate had died in the moon of popping trees, in her lodge, on the river, in the night, and 4 families had sat with her, and she had been buried properly with her husband, and her last words, the policeman said this without any idea what he was carrying, had been to ask whether anyone had heard that the family who went north had gotten through. Star Woman stood very still for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "That is a good death, and I am glad of it." And then she went up the slope behind the lodge, past the woodstack, past the rocks where her daughter had hidden with a baby on her hip, up to the rim where she could see the whole 4 miles of the valley. And she stood there in the wind for a long time and cried the way a person cries when there is finally room for it, which is not gracefully and not quietly. When she came back down at dusk, her eyes were swollen, and she did not care. And Gray Bear had built the fire up and put water on and was sitting on the sound side of himself, cutting willow for a drying rack, and he looked at her once and did not ask a single question. "Say her names to me," he said. "All of them. I will learn them." So she did, and he learned them. In the fall, Elktooth brought back a wife. He had gone south in the moon of ripe plums to say a thing at a grave and to see his mother, and he was gone 41 days, and everyone in the valley had privately decided he was not coming back, and nobody had said so out loud. He came up the creek on a September evening with 2 horses, an old woman on one of them, and a widow of 30 with a boy of 8 walking alongside. His mother was very small and very upright and had one clouded eye, and she looked at Gray Bear for a full minute without speaking, and then she said, "My son has told me a thing about the water." "Yes," said Gray Bear. "He could not swim," she said. "I told his father not to beat him for being late at the crossings. His father beat him anyway." Her chin came up. "I have known for 4 years that there was something wrong with the story, and I did not say it, because everyone else was so certain, and I was one old woman." She reached out and put her hand flat on Gray Bear's chest, over the sternum, which is not a small gesture. "I am saying it now. Late is not the same as never." And that was the settlement in the end. Not a court, not a warrant in a drawer at Fort Buford.
An old woman's hand on a man's chest in front of witnesses, in September, at the head of a creek in unceded country. And after that, no one in that camp ever spoke of the Powder River crossing again, because by the law they lived under, the matter was closed. With the newcomers, there were 9 of them in the valley, and by the following summer there were 14. 2 more families came up, relatives of the widow, one of them with a man who could work iron a little. And it was not a band, and it was not a village, and nobody was foolish enough to call it either. But there were 4 lodges above the spring, and a corral and 2 cache pits and a drying ground. And there was a proper wood detail. And there was a place where the children were made to sit in the evenings and learn the names. Star Woman taught them. That became her work, in addition to all the other work. Every 3rd evening, whoever was small enough to be made to sit, sat, and she said the line, hers, 6 generations, and gray bears 4, and elk 2.